Emma's hands trembled as she wiped down the counter. Just minutes ago, she had served a man who, at first glance, seemed like just another late-night diner guest. But there was something about him, a stillness, a weight in his gaze that made her stomach twist with unease. The air around them felt heavy, charged, as if the universe had paused to take notice. A strange foreboding curled in her gut, warning her that this was no ordinary customer. Something about him felt deliberate, like he wasn't here just for a meal. His eyes, sharp and observant, flickered over the diner, assessing every detail like he was memorizing the layout. His fingers tapped idly against the edge of the table, but there was a precision to it, almost calculated. When Emma had set down his coffee, he had met her gaze for just a second too long, not in a way that felt intrusive, but as if he was searching for something. It was enough to send a shiver down her spine. Who was he? Just another customer? Or was there something far greater at play? She didn't know it yet, but this single moment would unravel everything she thought she knew, her job, her future, and the delicate balance of her life. And once the truth came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. For 3 years, Sunset Diner had been Emma's second home. A small-town eatery nestled between a gas station and a laundromat. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, barely. The hours were long, the work exhausting, and yet, she stayed. She had memorized every regular's order before their name, dealt with rude customers, and covered countless extra shifts without complaint. If there was a birthday, she'd grab a candle. If a child was crying, she'd hand them a free cookie. She took pride in making people feel seen, even when no one did the same for her. But Emma wasn't just working for herself. Her younger brother Jake was in college. Without telling him, she sent extra money whenever she could, helping cover his textbooks and groceries. Their mother worked 2 jobs just to scrape by, and Emma refused to let Jake struggle alone. She didn't need recognition. She just needed to make ends meet. The pay, though? Miserable. Barely enough to cover rent. And management? They didn't care. They didn't see the way her feet ached after double shifts or how she bit her tongue when customers snapped at her. But she could have handled all of that if it weren't for something worse than bad pay, favoritism. Emma had seen it every single day. A businessman in a tailored suit? He got warm smiles, a fresh pot of coffee, and extra attention. A construction worker with paint-stained jeans? Rush service, short responses, and no refills. And if a customer looked like they wouldn't tip well, some staff didn't even bother pretending to care. Lisa, the lead waitress, had mastered the art of selective service. If a man in a tailored suit walked in, she greeted him with a dazzling smile and made sure his coffee was always fresh. But when a tired, single mother came in with 2 noisy kids, Lisa would roll her eyes, take her time bringing the menus, and sigh audibly if they asked for extra napkins. Emma had watched her deliberately ignore an elderly man in worn-out work boots for nearly 20 minutes, only to turn around and chat cheerfully with a businessman at the next table. It was an unwritten rule at the diner. Some customers were worth it, and some were invisible. She knew which customers were worth her time. Brian, another server, was no different. He laughed with some, ignored others, and made it clear that he didn't waste energy on those who wouldn't make his night more profitable. Emma hated it. But speaking up? That was dangerous. She had learned that the hard way. Months ago, she had casually mentioned to Lisa that a table had been waiting too long. Lisa barely glanced up from her phone before replying, "You don't get paid extra for being a saint, Emma." The words hit Emma like a slap, a sharp reminder of just how little kindness was valued here. Her jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay silent. A retort burned on her tongue, something about how decency shouldn't come with a price tag, but she swallowed it down. What was the point? Lisa and the others had already decided what kind of person she was, too soft, too naive. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. Still, as she turned away, a small ember of defiance flickered inside her. She wasn't going to change who she was just to fit into their world. That was the moment she realized. Kindness wasn't valued here. Fairness wasn't the priority. And doing the right thing? It came at a cost. That night, the diner was quiet. The dinner rush had passed, leaving behind the hum of a radio and the occasional clatter of silverware. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting a dull glow over the nearly empty room. Emma had just finished wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingled. A man stepped inside. His clothes were clean but plain, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money. He wasn't someone who commanded attention, but Emma noticed the way he hesitated at the entrance, his gaze flickering across the room as if expecting to be ignored. She had seen that look before, the quiet resignation of someone who had been overlooked too many times. Sure enough, Her coworkers reacted immediately. Lisa barely glanced up from her phone, her lips curling in mild disinterest. Brian, another server, paused mid-joke, his laughter dying as his eyes landed on the man. The easy, relaxed atmosphere of moments ago shifted into something colder, heavier. Emma felt it, the unspoken rule that certain customers didn't matter, that their presence was an inconvenience rather than an opportunity to serve. She knew what would happen next. Lisa would continue scrolling, Brian would pretend he was too busy, and the man would stand awkwardly for a moment before either leaving or taking a seat that no one would rush to. She could have ignored it, played along, like always. It would be easier, safer. But something inside her refused to stay silent. Emma stepped forward. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Sunset Diner. Have a seat wherever you'd like." The man looked momentarily surprised before nodding and choosing a booth near the window. Emma grabbed a menu and walked over, offering him a smile. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" He hesitated again, as if unsure whether her kindness was genuine. Yes, please." She poured the coffee, handing him the menu. "Take your time. Let me know if you have any questions." From behind the counter, Lisa let out an exaggerated sigh. "Seriously?" she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. Brian smirked but said nothing, turning away as if to distance himself from Emma's decision. Emma ignored them, focusing instead on the man as he flipped through the menu. He seemed grateful for the attention, for the simple act of being treated like any other guest. And to her, that was all that mattered. She had no way of knowing that this one act of kindness would cost her everything by morning. The next day, the tension in the diner was thick. Lisa wasn't on her phone. Brian wasn't laughing. Something was off. Conversations were hushed, and even the clatter of plates from the kitchen seemed subdued, as if the whole place was holding its breath. Then, the door to the manager's office creaked open. Mr. Carter, the owner, stepped out, his expression unreadable. "Emma, come with me." A pit formed in her stomach. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she followed him inside. His office was cramped, cluttered with paperwork and old receipts, the smell of stale coffee thick in the air. She had been in here before, but never like this. "We're letting you go," he said flatly, not even looking up from the papers on his desk. Emma's heart pounded. "What? Why?" Mr. Carter sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if this conversation exhausted him. "It's just not working out." Her mind raced. "Is this because I served that man last night?" His silence was her answer. He didn't need to confirm it. She already knew. Her throat tightened. "So, let me get this straight. I get fired for treating someone like a human being." Carter exhaled, shifting in his chair. "Emma, I don't expect you to understand, but sometimes it's best to follow the system we have in place." Emma scoffed, shaking her head. "The system? You mean the one where we ignore customers based on how they look? Where we decide who's worth decent service before they even order?" Carter's gaze hardened. "I'm not here to argue. You can collect your final paycheck next week." No explanation. No warning. Just like that, she was dismissed. 3 years of hard work, gone in an instant. She didn't argue. What was the point? But as she turned to leave, she forced herself to stop at the door. Turning back, she met Carter's eyes, her voice steady. "You know this isn't right." Carter didn't flinch, but something flickered in his expression, something almost like guilt. Almost. Emma walked out, her pulse thrumming in her ears. Lisa's smirk was waiting for her, smug and satisfied. Brian didn't even pretend to hide his amusement, shaking his head as if this outcome had been inevitable. The cook glanced up from the kitchen, then quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. Emma lifted her chin and walked past them all without a word. The cold morning air stung her skin as she stepped outside, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. How would she pay rent? Help Jake? The questions swirled in her mind, each one heavier than the last. Then, her phone buzzed. The screen lit up, an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, her hands trembling slightly. "Hello." An unknown number flashed across her screen. She hesitated before answering, her pulse quickening. Was this another rejection? Another reminder of what she had lost? "Hello," she answered, her voice uncertain. A deep, steady voice responded. "Emma, this is Daniel Pierce." Her breath caught. "Who?" "The man you served last night at Sunset Diner." Emma sat up straighter. Her mind raced. Of course, he had heard what happened. News traveled fast in a town like this. But what did he want? "I heard what they did to you," Daniel continued, his voice calm, yet purposeful. "And I want to make things right." Emma swallowed hard. With all due respect, Mr. Pierce, I don't think there's much that can be done. I disagree, Daniel said. I just bought Sunset Diner, and I need someone with integrity to run it. Emma's heart pounded. She had imagined countless ways this day could go, but this? It felt unreal. Could she really go from being fired to being in charge overnight? You're offering me a chance to fix what's broken? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm offering you a chance to make it your own, Daniel confirmed. No restrictions. No interference. Emma's pulse raced. For 3 years, she had kept her head down, hoping things would change on their own. And now, here was her chance to be that change. I'll do it, she said firmly, the decision settling over her like armor. On one condition. Name it, Daniel replied without hesitation. I want full authority. If I'm going to do this, I need to be able to make real changes my way. A pause. Then, a low chuckle. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Emma exhaled, the weight of uncertainty lifting ever so slightly. Less than 24 hours ago, she had walked out of the diner humiliated and lost. Tomorrow, she would walk back in, not as a waitress, but as the boss. And this time, things were going to be different. The next morning, Emma pushed open the doors of Sunset Diner. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon filled the air. The booths were occupied by the usual customers, sipping their morning drinks and reading newspapers. But today, something was different. The energy in the air had shifted. Lisa was the first to notice her. She froze mid-step, her eyes narrowing. Brian, who had been laughing over some joke with a busboy, stopped instantly. The smugness drained from his face as confusion took over. The rest of the staff slowly caught on, their conversations fading into hushed whispers. Before anyone could react, the door behind Emma swung open again. Daniel stepped in, exuding calm authority. His presence alone was enough to make the tension thicken. As of this morning, he announced, his voice cutting through the silence, Sunset Diner is under new management. A stunned hush fell over the diner. Lisa's smirk faded into a tight-lipped grimace, her arms crossing defensively. Brian's brows furrowed as he shifted uncomfortably, stealing nervous glances at Carter, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. The busboy dropped a tray, the clang echoing in the silence. Even the customers, mid-bite or mid-sip, paused, their heads turning in anticipation of what would happen next. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Every staff member turned to look at Carter, who had just emerged from his office, his face already reddening. Daniel's gaze locked onto Carter's. You're fired. Carter's mouth opened, but no words came out. The staff stared in disbelief. Lisa's face drained of color. Brian's jaw tightened. And Emma, Daniel continued, turning toward her, is your new manager. Emma let the silence stretch, watching the reality sink in for everyone. The people who had once dismissed her now had to answer to her. Lisa scoffed. You've got to be kidding. Daniel raised a brow. You're free to leave if you don't like it. Lisa's expression hardened, but she said nothing. Brian clenched his fists, glancing around, as if looking for support. None came. Emma finally spoke, her voice steady. Looks like we all have some adjusting to do. For the first few weeks, the tension was thick. Lisa left within days, muttering about disrespect as she stormed out the door. Brian stuck around longer, but his resentment was obvious. Eventually, he too disappeared, unable to handle the shift in power. Emma didn't mind. She was too busy making real changes. She implemented fair policies, ensuring that every customer was treated with the same level of respect. The staff who remained quickly adjusted, some even thanking her for creating a better work environment. As weeks turned into months, word spread about the new Sunset Diner. Customers noticed the change, the friendly service, the welcoming atmosphere. Business picked up, and for the first time in years, the diner was thriving. One evening, as Emma wiped down the counter, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up and smiled. The man who had unknowingly set everything in motion had returned. He took a seat at his usual booth. I hear this place is under new management, he said with a knowing grin. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of pride, relief, and quiet triumph. She had fought for this moment, endured humiliation, uncertainty, and doubt. Now, standing here, she finally felt like she belonged. She met his gaze, a slow smile spreading across her face, not just out of courtesy, but out of something deeper. Victory. Emma nodded. That's right. He picked up the menu, then looked at her. "I think I'll have a coffee." Emma poured him a fresh cup, setting it gently on the table. On the house. As she walked away, she couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was her diner, and she had earned every bit of it. Lessons learned. Kindness is never wasted. Even if doing the right thing comes with challenges, integrity is always recognized in the end. Standing up for what is right matters. Emma could have stayed silent like before, but her choice to act changed her life. Justice and ethics prevail. Those who misuse power may seem in control, but fairness eventually wins. Opportunities arise when you fight for them. Losing her job seemed like a setback, but it led Emma to something much greater. Meaningful message from the story. Always do what is right, even when no one is watching. Justice may take time, but it always arrives. Losing one door can open an entirely new path. Not everyone will appreciate kindness, but those who truly matter will recognize it. Personal perspective on the story. Emma's story is more than just a lesson about fairness. It is a source of inspiration. It shows that you don't need power to create change, just the courage to stand up. Good people may face challenges, but they do not lose in the end. Lisa and Brian may have won for a moment, but Emma was the true victor. Opportunities come to those who deserve them. Without her integrity, Daniel would have never chosen Emma to lead. This story is a reminder. Don't let fear stop you from doing what is right. A single action can change your entire life. If you believe in the power of doing what is right, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing for more inspiring content. Subscribe to Story Precious for weekly stories filled with meaningful lessons and insights. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about Emma's story? Have you ever experienced something similar? Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories on Story Precious.